Hello and welcome to Vantage This Week, a show where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. The South China Sea has seen its most dangerous escalation so far. Chinese Coast Guard clashed with the Filipino Navy. They threatened Filipino soldiers with knives and spears. With this unprecedented attack, China is once again raising the risk of conflict. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin was on a two-nation tour of Asia. On Tuesday, Putin landed in Pyongyang. What followed can only be called a Putin-Kim Bromance. We'll tell you what the world should make of this. Next, Putin paid a visit to Vietnam. Here, the main focus was on the strategic partnership. In India, an American delegation met the Dalai Lama. There were harsh statements and a strong message was sent. In Islam's holiest city, Mecca, the Hajj pilgrimage came to an end amid temperatures nearing 52 degrees. More than 1,000 people lost their lives. All this and more lined up for you. Let's get started. It is the most dangerous escalation in the South China Sea so far. What you just saw happened on Monday. Chinese sailors crossed a line and launched an unprecedented attack, the kind that could easily trigger a conflict. Let's look at those pictures again. That's a Philippine Navy vessel at the center, surrounded by the Chinese Coast Guard. You can see a Chinese soldier in an orange life jacket. He's threatening the Philippine Navy officer with an axe. There is another Chinese soldier behind him, and he seems to be wielding a sword. And from here, the situation deteriorated. Chinese troops deployed tear gas. They hurled rocks. They blared sirens and strobe lights. Some Chinese troops boarded the Philippine boat and they destroyed it. The boat's equipment was smashed. The Chinese troops punctured the rubber boat. They took away phones and rifles of Filipino personnel. It was excessive and brutal. 8 Philippine officers were injured. One of them suffered serious injuries. He lost his right thumb. The confrontation happened in this region, near the Second Thomas Shoal. This is part of the disputed South China Sea. Beijing stakes a claim to the Second Thomas Shoal, but Manila currently controls it. In recent years, Beijing has challenged Manila's claims. The Chinese have sent a large number of Coast Guard ships. They've engaged in a number of provocative actions, all of it near the Second Thomas Shoal. They've rammed into Manila's ships. They've fired water cannons at them. The Chinese have tried to establish a blockade around this shipwreck, the Sierra Madre. This is a World War II era ship. It was deliberately marooned by the Philippines in the 1990s, mainly to assert its claims on the Second Thomas Shoal. The Philippines has stationed Marines on it, on the shipwreck. They have Marines and these Marines need supplies. So every now and then, Manila sends a boat or a ship with supplies for the soldiers. China has actively tried to block these missions, these supply missions. And Monday's events are a sign. The Chinese are resorting to more aggressive tactics. The same strategy that they've used with India on the Himalayan border. More aggression, more provocation. Since 2020, Indian and Chinese troops have clashed on more than one occasion in Ladakh. This is along the line of actual control, or LAC. And here too, the Chinese use sticks and rods to attack. Now they're doing the same with the Philippines and justifying it to boot.
The Philippines, in defiance of China's warnings, insisted on trespassing on Rinai Reef in China's Nansha Islands. This is the direct cause of the incident. The Chinese Coast Guard at the scene has taken professional law enforcement measures with restraint, which aimed at stopping the illegal supply mission by the Philippine vessels, and no direct measures were taken against the Philippine personnel.
They say they acted with restraint. If using knives and axes is restraint, what is excess? Where is the restraint in boarding naval ships without permission and then wrecking and looting them? The Philippines says only pirates do this. And we couldn't agree more. This is an act of aggression by China, and they don't seem to be interested in de-escalating tensions. Over the weekend, there was a fresh provocation. So China introduced a new law. It gives the Chinese Coast Guard sweeping powers. It allows them to seize foreign ships and detain their crews. They can be kept in Chinese custody for up to 60 days, and that too without a trial. The Philippines is a clear target of this new law, and their president has issued a warning to China.
If by a willful act on a Filipino, not only serviceman, but even a Filipino citizen, if a Filipino citizen is killed by a willful act, that is, I think, very, very close to what we define as an act of war, and therefore we will respond accordingly.
If the Chinese Coast Guard arrests any Filipino, it will be like an act of war. That's how President Marcos Jr. sees it. And he has support from Washington. The US has condemned the Chinese attack. They've called it, and I'm quoting, irresponsible and escalatory. The Americans have a defense treaty with the Philippines, a treaty that was signed in 1951. It's a mutual defense treaty. It says that if any one of them is attacked by a third party, both countries will help each other. And after the Chinese attack this week, Washington has reaffirmed its commitment to this pact.
It's reckless, and it threatens regional peace and stability. And finally, this escalatory incident is the latest in a series of provocations by the PRC to impede critically needed supplies from reaching service members stationed at the Sierra Madre, and those actions reflect consistent disregard for the safety of Filipino lives and for international law in the South China Sea.
Yesterday, Manila sent a message to Beijing urging China to avoid actions which endanger the lives of sailors. The Philippines says it wants a dialogue. But that cannot happen until Beijing dials down tensions on the high seas. The situation is still volatile. China needs to de-escalate and pull back its troops. Else, we are heading into another conflict at one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world. "25 years, a quarter of a century. That's how long Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia. In this time, he's visited around 70 countries. He's walked many red carpets, but this one beats all of it. I'm talking about North Korea. Vladimir Putin landed in Pyongyang on Tuesday night. The city was all decked up to welcome him. We are talking the whole shebang. Portraits of Putin, flags of Russia, even Russian music on state television. Take a look. I guess it was to be expected. North Korea does not get many visitors, certainly not world leaders like Putin. So Kim Jong-un rolled out his fanciest red carpet. He was at the airport himself. He greeted Putin with a handshake followed by a semi-hug. Now this visit is very important. Putin last came to North Korea in the year 2000, so it's been 24 years. And in this time, in these 24 years, the equations have changed. Kim was not leading North Korea back then. His father was. Plus, in the year 2000, Putin was a newbie on the world stage. Now he's a seasoned but isolated leader. These two had a meeting last year as well, Kim and Putin. Kim traveled to a Russian city, a city in the Russian Far East. And now Putin is returning the favor. As with any visit, let's look at two aspects here. The first is chemistry. Putin and Kim looked quite comfortable with each other. One moment probably sums it up best. Both men were about to enter a car, but they couldn't decide who would go first. Take a look. The pomp wasn't over yet. This is a two-day state visit by the Russian president, so the official welcome was still pending. It was organized at the Kim Il-sung Square. Again, the pictures were stunning. The roads were lined with hundreds of people. They waved Russian and North Korean flags. In typical Kim style, everything was choreographed. Later in the day, there was more bromance. Putin gifted a Russian limousine to Kim Jong-un. He also drove Kim around Pyongyang. Look at this. So we've covered the first aspect, the chemistry and optics. Now we come to the second, the substance. Putin and Kim held a long bilateral meeting. It lasted for nearly 2 hours. After that, they signed a new bilateral agreement. They upgraded their relationship to the next level, that of comprehensive strategic partnership. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. Putin and Kim hinted at multiple areas of cooperation: military technology, mutual assistance in case of aggression, coordination on healthcare, and also education and science. Now, two of these stand out: sharing military technology and mutual defense. Very significant. Putin is saying that he may defend North Korea if it is attacked. And that's a big promise to make. Same with military technology. Sanctions prevent countries from selling technology to North Korea, especially strategic ones. But Vladimir Putin is saying he may do it anyway. Which brings us to the statements. What did Kim and Putin say? Kim offered full support for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin slammed US efforts to isolate Kim. Listen in.
The government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea expresses full support and solidarity with the Russian government, army, and people in carrying out a special military operation in Ukraine to protect their sovereignty, security interests, as well as territorial integrity.
We highly appreciate your consistent and unwavering support for Russian policy, including the Ukrainian strand. I am referring to our fight against the hegemonic policy imposed for decades, the imperialist policy of the United States and its satellites against the Russian Federation.
That was Putin's day in Pyongyang, eventful and colorful. But what will be the impact of this visit? How should the world see it? This visit symbolizes a revival of ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. Time for a short history lesson. In the 1950s, Kim's grandfather was ruling North Korea. His name was Kim Il-sung. He was supported by Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Back then, ties were great. Pyongyang was a satellite of Moscow, but Stalin died in 1953, and after that, the ties changed. Kim Il-sung purged pro-Soviet forces in his regime. He began consolidating power. Thus, Moscow and Pyongyang grew apart. Cut to 2024. Things are on track again. Putin and Kim have revived the 1950s romance. The question is, will it last? Well, there is nothing organic about this relationship. It is based on common enmity towards the US. Having said that, there is scope for expansion. Let's look at what each side stands to get. First, Kim Jong-un. He needs food and fuel for his people, and Russia can help him. It is the largest wheat exporter in the world, also one of the biggest sources of energy, one of the biggest energy producers. So clear synergy there. Kim also needs advanced military technology, especially on ballistic missiles. Again, who can give him that? The Russians. Also sanctions relief. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It can shield Kim from further sanctions. So the North Korean leader has a lot to gain. Which brings us to Putin. What does he stand to gain? A useful supplier of military goods like bullets. In fact, North Korean equipment has already been spotted in Ukraine, plus a new deterrent. Someone who can keep the US busy in the Pacific. And Washington knows this. They're concerned about this new partnership.
The deepening cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is something that should be of concern, especially to anyone that's interested in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, but also supporting the people of Ukraine as they continue to fight against Russian aggression.
There are two ways of looking at this. The West says, look at how isolated Putin is, so isolated that he's meeting Kim. But that's not how Putin sees it. For him, it's a strategy to counter the West. And for that, optics don't matter. Vladimir Putin in Vietnam. He's gone there after visiting North Korea. It's the last leg of his Asia tour. Yesterday, like we told you, he was in North Korea. Today, the Russian president landed in Hanoi. The day started with a welcome ceremony. There were children waving flags, bands playing, even a 21-gun salute. Not as grand as Pyongyang, but it was quite big by Hanoi standards. After that, it was the business end of the visit. The main focus is their strategic partnership, and it's an old one. In fact, the oldest for Vietnam. Russia was the first country to sign a strategic partnership with Vietnam. They did it back in 2001. Putin was the leader of Russia then too in 2001, and now he's visiting to strengthen this partnership.
Russia attaches great importance to the issues of further strengthening the traditionally friendly Russian-Vietnamese comprehensive strategic relations, strategic partnership relations.
So Putin met Vietnamese leaders, he held multiple meetings, he talked about trade, signed deals on energy cooperation and discussed some international issues as well.
We also touched upon current international issues. I would like to emphasize that the positions of Russia and Vietnam largely coincide or are close.
That's the point that Putin is trying to drive home, that the West may be trying to isolate him, but he still has partners and friends. And Moscow's relationship with Hanoi goes back all the way to the 1950s, when Vietnam was a new communist state and Moscow gave it economic support, diplomatic recognition and military backing. Thousands of Vietnamese students studied in Soviet universities, including Nguyen Phu Trong. He's Vietnam's current Communist Party chief. Over the decades, Vietnam saw multiple wars and Moscow came to their rescue. It gave them fighter jets, tanks, helicopters, even soldiers, 11,000 of them. Even after the Soviet Union fell, the ties remained strong, and it shows everywhere. Take Hanoi's architecture, for example. Most old buildings have a Soviet touch. And not just that, Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum, houses the body of its founding father, Ho Chi Minh. His preserved body is on display there, but every year the mausoleum is closed for 2 months. Do you know why? Because the embalmed body is flown to Russia for maintenance. Such is their relationship. It's a unique friendship, and a key aspect of it is military ties. Russia is Vietnam's largest military supplier. It accounts for 80% of Vietnam's armed exports. Nearly all of their naval vessels are from Russia. And defense remains the focus on this visit as well. Putin has arrived with his defense minister here, and while Vietnam's reliance on Russian weapons is significant, it is looking to diversify. And that's because of the fear of Western sanctions. In fact, this state visit was also condemned by the United States. So Vietnam doesn't want to take any chances. It is diversifying its sources. Which brings us to the country itself. Why Vietnam? Why did Putin choose Hanoi? And the answer is quite simple. Vietnam is like the new cool kid on the block. It's a rising economy, a manufacturing powerhouse, a leading exporter of goods, and for companies leaving China, it's one of the compelling alternatives. So everyone wants to be friends with Vietnam. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone. Last year, US President Joe Biden was in the country. The two nations upgraded their relations. Soon after that, Chinese President Xi Jinping followed. His was a grand visit too. And now it is Putin's turn. It's his 5th visit to Vietnam. So there's a clear pattern. Every country wants Vietnam in their corner. But who is Vietnam choosing? The answer is no one. They want to do business with everyone. And it's their age-old strategy. They call it bamboo diplomacy. It's inspired from the bamboo plant. Strong roots and flexible branches, bending in all directions. And Vietnam is keeping it quite flexible right now. They're keeping their options open, not isolating anyone, at the same time refusing to be tied up in alliances. It's a strategy that has paid off until now, and they do not plan to change it. This latest visit by Putin is proof. Are Europe and China headed towards a trade war? It increasingly looks like that. Europe fired the first shot last week. It imposed tariffs on Chinese electric cars. Now China has fired back. Its target is pork supplies from the EU. Beijing has launched an investigation into them. So it's EVs versus pork. Beijing has opened what it's calling an anti-dumping investigation. On what grounds? The same as Europe's complaints against Chinese cars. Here's what China says. Europe is dumping cheap pork into the Chinese market, and this is hurting domestic suppliers. The complaint has been filed by the China Animal Agriculture Association. Sounds like a nondescript body, but clearly they serve a political purpose because China's Commerce Ministry has responded swiftly to their complaint. The ministry says it will look into last year's pork imports from the EU. The investigation could take up to 1 year to finish, and it could be extended by another 6 months if the Chinese investigators want to.
In accordance with the relevant Chinese laws and regulations and World Trade Organization rules, Chinese domestic industries have the right to file an application to open an investigation into European dairy and pork imports to maintain normal market competition and order and safeguard their own legitimate rights.
This is obviously not a coincidence. It comes less than a week after Brussels made its move to limit the imports of Chinese EVs into Europe. They're grappling with an oversupply. Electric cars from China have been piling up at European ports. Some of them have been stuck there for as long as 18 months. Manufacturers are struggling to sell these cars now. So Europe wants to slow down imports. And how will they do that? By slapping a duty of up to 38% on Chinese cars. Beijing has been livid about this. It threatened to fight Europe with a lawsuit.
The actions by the European side are suspected of violating WTO rules and are naked protectionist behavior. China reserves the right to file a suit to the WTO and take all necessary measures to resolutely defend the rights and interests of Chinese companies.
So first, China talked about a legal battle. Now it has launched a probe into pork from Europe. It's a tit-for-tat move. The probe makes little sense otherwise. In 2023, China imported $282 billion worth of goods from the EU. $282 billion. Do you know what was the value of the pork imports? Less than $2 billion. And most of the supply came from just 3 countries: Spain, Denmark and the Netherlands. So pork is just a fraction of their overall trade, and targeting pork imports will not really hurt the EU financially. So this probe is about making a statement, a pressure tactic of sorts from Beijing to force European states to oppose the tariffs on Chinese cars. And Beijing has a small window of opportunity to do this. EU states get a vote on these tariffs. There are 27 countries in the European Union. If 15 of them oppose the plan, if 15 of them vote against the plan, it could be shot down. Perhaps that's what China is aiming for, to exploit divisions and political fault lines in Europe. And it's not unachievable, because there are already rumblings of dissent. Take Germany, for instance. It opposes EV tariffs on China. Spain, too, sounds concerned. It is one of the major sellers of pork to China. Yesterday, Madrid issued a statement. It said Spanish officials are working with the EU to avoid any counter tariffs on pork sales. The car industry, too, is pushing back against the plan.
The industry also made quite clear statements that tariffs, as suggested now by the EU, will not increase the competitiveness of the automotive industry. And therefore, we rather advocate for investing into the competitiveness of the European Union rather on trying to protect the auto industry. And I mean, you cannot protect the automotive industry only in the European Union if they are all over the world in all global markets.
It's a tricky challenge for Brussels. China's influence on Europe's automobile market runs deep. I'll give you another example. BYD is the biggest seller of EVs in the world. BYD is a Chinese company. It is also a sponsor for the Euros, the continent's premier football tournament. It's being sponsored by a Chinese car maker, not European auto giants, and that should tell you something. China plans to fight this back. It will challenge European tariffs, and if Europe fails to respond like a union, it will be a losing battle.
President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
Suppose you want to poke China. Who do you call? The answer is Nancy Pelosi. First, she enraged China by visiting Taiwan. Now she's enraging China by meeting the Dalai Lama. It's apparently her superpower. But jokes aside, she is quite good at it. Pelosi is part of a high-ranking US delegation. They landed in Dharamshala in India on Tuesday, and today they met the Dalai Lama. We told you about this visit yesterday. The delegation has both Democrats and Republicans. Their aim is to show solidarity with Tibetans. I would say Nancy Pelosi went a step ahead. She did not just show solidarity with Tibetans, she launched an all-out attack on Xi Jinping. Listen to this.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge and tradition and compassion and purity of soul and love, he will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But to you, President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
Strong words there. Pelosi says history will remember the Dalai Lama, but it will erase Xi Jinping. China certainly won't like that, but I guess that's the point. This whole visit is about poking China, about putting the focus back on Tibet. It started earlier this year with a new bill. It was passed by the US Congress in February. And what does it say? That China must restart talks with Tibetan officials. Now, just to be clear, this law has no bearing in China. They will simply brush it aside. America cannot draft laws for China. But this move does reveal their priorities. That the Americans are focusing on Tibet again. And not just America. Most democracies are talking about Tibet again. The European Union is. Australia is. So why isn't India? New Delhi is better placed than other countries. It is the home of the Tibetan movement. The Dalai Lama lives here. The Tibetan government is based here. Yet there is a sort of ambivalence. Let's look at the history first. India and Tibet used to be neighbors for a long time. Back then, it was a separate kingdom, Tibet, sort of like a buffer between the two big civilizations of India and China. But that changed in 1950. China sent soldiers into Tibet. They annexed the whole region and made it a part of China. Now, this posed a challenge for India. Suddenly, the border with Tibet became the border with China. In 1954, New Delhi recognized China's move. It accepted that Tibet is part of China. But in 1959, the Dalai Lama fled to India. Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister then. He gave asylum to the Dalai Lama and his followers, and they've been living here since. Which brings us to the present. India finds itself in a unique position. On the one hand, India accepts China's control over Tibet. On the other, India hosts a Tibetan government in exile. It may look like a tough position to be in, but it's also a blessing. New Delhi can use Tibet to put pressure on China. Just consider this US delegation. You can't have a visit like this without India's help on Indian soil. The question is, what should India do with this unique position? Prime Minister Modi started on a positive note. He invited many leaders for his inauguration in 2014. Among them was the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile. And it was seen as a message to China. But in 2019, there was no invite. In 2024, same thing, no invite for the Tibetans. But in between this, there was another positive signal. In 2021, Prime Minister Modi wished the Dalai Lama on his birthday. It was the first outreach from the Indian Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, to the Dalai Lama. It came after 7 years in office. Since then, it's become a tradition. The Dalai Lama's next birthday is on the 6th of July. I'm sure Modi will reach out again. He should. But this time, maybe the Prime Minister should go one step ahead. Instead of a tweet, maybe he should meet the Dalai Lama. It hasn't happened in a long time. The last such meeting was in the year 2010. That's when the Dalai Lama met then Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. We say it's time for a repeat. China keeps claiming Indian territory as its own, so why shouldn't India poke back? Just look at New Delhi's policy on Taiwan. On paper, it's the one China policy, but India has slowly diluted it. After Modi won a third term in office, the Taiwanese president congratulated him. And guess what? Prime Minister Modi replied to him. If the Taiwan policy can be diluted, why not the Tibet policy? It's a question that India must think about. We are well placed to amplify the Tibetan movement globally, whether it's hosting conferences or inviting foreign delegations or including Tibet in India's diplomatic agenda. Morally, it's the right thing to do. Strategically, it's a good way to pressure China. Staying with Indian diplomacy, New Delhi is hosting a very special guest, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't Hasina just visit India? Well, she did. She was among the leaders who attended Prime Minister Narendra Modi's swearing-in ceremony. And 2 weeks later, she's back here. And that in itself tells a story. Sheikh Hasina landed in New Delhi earlier today. She also met Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. But tomorrow is the crucial day. She will get a ceremonial welcome at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. After that, she will hold bilateral talks with Prime Minister Modi. So Saturday is the moving day. And what can we expect? Let's talk symbolism first. This is the first incoming bilateral visit of Modi's third term. It tells you about India's priorities. As the Prime Minister says, it's neighborhood first. Secondly, Sheikh Hasina is visiting India before China. Her trip to Beijing was announced earlier this month. She's expected to travel in the second week of July, and before that, she's decided to come to India. What does that tell you? Dhaka too is showing its priorities. India before China. Now we come to the specifics. What are the expected outcomes? Reports say 10 agreements are in the pipeline. They cover multiple sectors like energy, connectivity and trade. Some joint projects will also be announced, like the India-Bangladesh Friendship Bridge. It connects India's northeast to Ramgarh in Bangladesh. The idea is to give northeastern states access to the sea. Now, this project began in 2021. Hasina and Modi are expected to inaugurate it. Both leaders have clear expectations from this visit. We look at Sheikh Hasina first. What are her expectations? Her biggest demand is a water sharing agreement for Teesta. Now, Teesta, as you would know, is a major river in South Asia. It originates in the Indian state of Sikkim. It flows via West Bengal and Bangladesh and finally empties into the Bay of Bengal. Right now, India gets almost 55% of Teesta's water, but Dhaka wants India to share more. Northern Bangladesh faces water shortage in the summer. So Hasina is pushing for a water sharing agreement. Just one problem though. West Bengal is not on board. Until the state government agrees, a deal cannot be struck, which is why Dhaka is pursuing alternatives, mainly a river restoration project. Bangladesh wants to improve Teesta's water flow. They want to dredge the river bed, build embankments and reclaim land near the river. Again, just one problem. This project will cost a lot of money, around $1 billion. That will be the bill. China has already filed a proposal to do it for Bangladesh. The Chinese want to build it. And this has spooked India. Last month, New Delhi rushed its foreign secretary to Dhaka. He too expressed interest in this project. So water sharing is Sheikh Hasina's top demand. I guess it was expected. Bangladesh has more than 170 million people and most of them live near river basins. Now we come to Prime Minister Modi. What will be his expectations? Mainly assurances. China's footprint has grown in Dhaka. They have invested close to $30 billion in Bangladesh. This money has gone into crucial projects like rail bridges and tunnels. Then you have loans. Dhaka owes around $17 billion to China and they want more money. Hasina has requested China for another loan. It's worth almost $5 billion. Even military contact is increasing. This year, China and Bangladesh held a joint military drill, the first such exercise by both countries. Now, if you add all of this up, one thing becomes very, very clear. Bangladesh cannot pick between India and China. It may prioritize India, but it cannot abandon China. That is why this visit is important. India's neighborhood policy has come under criticism. China has made significant gains in Nepal, the Maldives and Sri Lanka. So in many ways, Dhaka is the last ally standing. And that gives Sheikh Hasina a lot of leverage. It also puts the ball in New Delhi's court. Modi sent a positive signal by inviting India's neighbors to his inauguration. The key is to build on that. We'll be tracking this visit closely.
Honest students suffer and students who want to cheat benefit.
Months of preparation, years of investments, and for some, a wait of a lifetime. That's what is at stake in India. I'm talking about the recent examination controversies. First was the NEET exam, a common test for medical courses. Now it's the NET exam. NET stands for National Eligibility Test. Say you want to become a professor at an Indian university or you're eyeing a research fellowship. Then NET is your ticket. Your success depends on your NET score. This year's exam was held on Tuesday. Almost 900,000 candidates appeared for the test. 9 lakh. It was organized across 317 cities. But guess what? That exam has been cancelled. Why? Listen to India's Education Ministry.
On the 19th of June, the UGC got some inputs from the Home Ministry's Cybercrimes Department. From those inputs, the Education Ministry realized that there's a chance that the examination may have been compromised. We took prompt action by cancelling the examination to protect the interest of students.
There was a tip-off from the cyber cell, a possibility that the exam paper was leaked. Later, the Education Minister confirmed this. He said the question paper was leaked on the dark web. So the NET exam was cancelled. And what happens next? Well, the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation, is investigating this case. Meanwhile, another exam will be conducted at a later date, which means more delay, more public expenditure, and more tension for the candidates. But this problem goes beyond just NET. We've told you about the NEET controversy. It has two different parts. First is about the grace marks. The NEET exam started late in some locations. The students said we did not get enough time, so the testing agency came up with a solution. Grace marks for more than 1,500 students. More than 1,500 students received these extra marks. Not everyone is happy about it. Some students called it unfair. They filed complaints in courts across India, so the testing agency backpedaled. They've offered to retest these students, a retest instead of the grace marks. That's the first issue. The second issue is paper leaks. This investigation, the paper leak investigation in NEET, is happening in the state of Bihar. 4 men have been arrested so far. They say they got the NEET question paper one day before. If true, this is massive and very serious. NEET is the first step towards becoming a doctor in India, so fraud is not just unethical, it's a matter of life and death. More than 2.4 million students took this test. All of them are in a state of limbo now. As expected, this controversy has become political. Today, a few students met Congress leader Rahul Gandhi. Afterwards, he blamed the BJP for this fiasco.
This is extremely damaging to students, and it's happening because all our institutions have been captured. Our vice chancellors are placed not based on merit, but because they belong to a particular organization. And this organization and the BJP have penetrated our education system and destroyed it. What was done by Mr. Narendra Modi to the economy with demonetization has now been done to the education system.
Let's focus on two questions now. One, how do these papers leak? And two, how can it be stopped? Now, most of these standardized tests are organized by the NET, the National Testing Agency. It was set up in 2017. It works under the Union Ministry of Education. The NET organizes a lot of elite exams, like the JEE, the NEET, and the NET. Now, put together, their exams affect 10 million students in India. And the government is now cracking down on them. Today, the Education Minister spoke to the media. He said a high-level panel will investigate affairs at the National Testing Agency. He also said the culprits would not be spared.
I want to assure you that after the investigation, the culprits will be strictly punished, whether it's the NTA or some high-ranking official at the NTA. We will take recommendations from a high-level panel on reforming NTA's structure, functioning, examination process, transparency and security protocol.
Now we come to the leaks. How do they happen? Many people are involved in making question papers, in drafting, in checking, in publishing, in transporting, and in distributing, so the paper can be leaked at any of these stages. All it takes is one corrupt official. So the problem is not political, it is systemic. Which brings us to the second question. How can we stop it? This year, the Indian Parliament passed a new law, sort of like an anti-paper leak law. And what does it do? It calls for strict punishment in case of leaks. Say someone has used unfair means to take an exam. If convicted, they face strict punishment. 3 to 5 years in jail plus a fine of up to 10 lakh rupees, which is around 12,000 US. But sometimes these leaks are not organized by one person. They're done by a group. In which case, the punishment is stricter, between 5 and 10 years in jail, plus a minimum fine of 1 crore rupees. Which is $112,000. So the law is very clear on leaking papers, yet it doesn't seem to have stopped. Reports say there have been 41 paper leaks in the last 5 years. They have affected 1.4 crore applicants. When a paper leaks, it sets off a chain of events. The retest is delayed, the admission is delayed, the academic session is delayed, and public money is wasted. Not to mention, exam integrity is lost. So the government needs to get a grip on this. Normally, students pass or fail in exams, but this time the system has failed. And do spare a thought for the students. Imagine what they go through. The tension, the uncertainty, the anxiety, we can't even begin to comprehend it. So the government must remember the mental toll on students, because every time a paper leaks, their dreams are dashed. So retest is not the best solution. The root problem must be addressed. Now let's turn to the other side of Africa, to Kenya in the east. The nation has been rocked by protests this week, and today they turned deadly. At least one person has died and hundreds of others have been injured. This occurred as the protests spread to every corner of Kenya. The people are protesting against new taxes. Kenya's government wants to raise an extra $2.7 billion in the next financial year, and it plans to do this by hiking taxes. Yesterday, Kenya's new finance bill passed its second reading, meaning the taxes are a step closer to becoming law. That is why the protests have intensified and now turned deadly. Here's our report.
Nairobi, Eldoret, Kisumu. All over Kenya, you can hear people chant, "Ruto must go." The Kenyans are talking about their president, William Ruto. That's not his only name in Kenya, though. He has also been likened to a biblical tax collector, Zacchaeus, or Zakayo as he's known in Kenya. Ruto is often compared to this figure because of his penchant for taxation. The protests that you see are directed against new taxes, brought in via this year's finance bill, which is like Kenya's annual budget.
Order. Honorable members, the results of the division on second reading of the Finance Bill 2024 is as follows. Ayes 204, nays 115, abstentions nil, so the ayes have it. Order. Take your seats.
The Finance Bill 2024 passed a second reading in Parliament yesterday. It's one step closer to becoming a law, which is what sparked the latest round of demonstrations. And the latest police retaliation. The police have been attacking the protesters with tear gas, water cannons, and, according to some reports, even bullets. At least one person is dead. Hundreds of people have been injured. The Kenyan protesters are mostly Gen Z. They're young, tech-savvy and informed. They organize through social media.
Social media, I'm telling you, Ogopa Gen Z. Ogopa Gen Z. Can you see these guys? Like, Ogopa Gen Z. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, everywhere online.
The protests broke out on Tuesday and initially seemed to have worked. The Kenyan government withdrew some of the more controversial taxes, like a 16% tax on bread. But the Kenyan protesters aren't convinced.
We don't deny there are things that they changed in the finance bill, but as understood, they changed from one tax to another.
The protesters don't want the finance bill amended. They want it rejected outright. But Kenya's president looks set to fight them till the end.
So help me God.
William Ruto became president in 2022, and every year he raises taxes borne by the common people. Taxes on food, fuel, and even medical treatments. Ruto wants to tax it all. His reason isn't the worst. Kenya has a high debt burden. Ruto inherited much of it from the previous administration, and he wants to lower it. To do that, he needs money. But here's the problem. The burden of Ruto's taxes falls on everyone, including the poor and marginalized, and especially the salaried class. Kenyans have been suffering through a cost of living crisis. Many can barely make ends meet as it is. And on top of all this come Ruto's taxes. The taxes have broken the backs of local businesses. They keep shutting down by the hundreds. The people are hurting, and they feel that Ruto and his government aren't doing their part. The president has been under scrutiny for frequent foreign trips, sometimes aboard luxury jets, on the taxpayers' dime. So the message from the protesters is simple.
Cut on your expenditure. Do not overtax us. That's the laziest way for the government to earn revenue, overtaxation.
Ruto doesn't seem likely to take this advice. His finance bill is going through the motions. There will be a third and final hearing on the bill this coming Tuesday. Then it'll head to Ruto's office for his signature. Kenya's anti-tax protesters don't have much time left, so expect the demonstrations to get bigger in the days ahead.
Now let's turn our attention to Islam's holiest city, Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, where nearly 2 million Muslims began the Hajj pilgrimage last week. But as they reached the end yesterday, for many, the journey proved fatal.
I'm not just talking about old people, young people have died too. It was a very hard day because of the extreme heat. A lot of people died. The ambulances were overwhelmed. You would talk to someone and suddenly they would die.
Unregistered pilgrims made up more than half of the deaths. Without cooling or healthcare resources, they perished in the intense heat. And that's not all. Thousands of others suffered from heat exhaustion. Close to 3,000 cases were reported on Sunday alone. Now, hot weather is not new for Mecca. It has almost always seen a hot climate, and this has not bothered the Hajj in the past, which has been conducted in the same way for centuries now. But global warming is making the heat severe, and the infrastructure can't seem to keep up. Scientists say that by 2040, Hajj is going to be fatal. And it won't be an isolated scenario. By 2050, India will be among the first places on earth where temperatures cross survivability limits. And we can already see the signs. North India is reeling under a prolonged heat wave. Since March, 40,000 cases of heat stroke have been reported. At least 110 people have died, and the capital, Delhi, has seen a punishing summer. Daily temperatures are crossing 40 degrees Celsius and peaking at nearly 50 degrees. There are water shortages and power outages. This week, electricity demand reached an all-time high. Climate change is causing the current infrastructure to fail. In some cases, it is making deadly heat waves 35 times more likely. Like in the case of the United States, much of the country is sweltering. There's a record-breaking heat wave. 75 million people are under extreme heat alerts. That is 1 in 5 people.
We want to be clear. This is extremely hot for June, and New Yorkers should not underestimate the heat. With climate change leading to more frequent and intense heat, summers are different than they were before, and so we should expect and be prepared for the hot weather that is coming. If this is an indication, we're just starting out the summer months. We could only expect even more as the summer continues to move forward.
Indeed, we can. No continent is safe from extreme heat. Look at Europe. It is the fastest warming continent on Earth. Here, temperatures are rising at twice the global average. Greece is among the worst affected. It is witnessing the earliest heat wave on record, which has warranted school closures, restrictions, and even caused deaths. France is in the same boat. It is braving an early heat wave, which is worrying because the Olympic Games will be held in Paris next month. The last Summer Olympics in Tokyo were the hottest in history. with temperatures reaching 32 degrees. Paris is expected to break the record. Now, I know 32 degrees does not seem like much. For many countries, this barely qualifies as dangerous. But it is. In June, summer has barely begun for France. So Paris temperature should be between 14 to 24 degrees Celsius. That is the average. But this year, it has already crossed 30 degrees. The sudden increase can seem unbearable. Because like most countries, France does not have the infrastructure to deal with such abnormal heat, meaning there could be a shortage of resources, additional stress on healthcare systems, heat-related illnesses and even deaths. So the examples are everywhere. Heat is breaking record after record and nations are baking. What are the governments doing about it? They're asking people to drink more water, not much else. Despite their promises, fossil fuel use has broken the global record. Under their watch, satellites like Elon Musk's Starlink are damaging the atmosphere. They're burning the ozone layer. So this is the gist of the matter. Governments have chosen delusion over action. We are not prepared for the future, while climate change chips away at our present. It is a catastrophe in the making. For our last story tonight, let's talk about aliens. They live among us and they have been doing so for years. They are an advanced species. They're highly intelligent and they hide in a secret base here on Earth by disguising themselves as humans. Sounds like the plot of Men in Black. Maybe the movie was ahead of its time because a new study says that this could be true. We're not making this up. A study has been conducted by researchers at the Harvard University and they say aliens may be walking among humans as humans. Researchers have three hypotheses. First, aliens have come from a different time period or planet. Second, they have evolved on Earth but separately from humans. And third, they come from an ancient civilization that was not completely destroyed. The study also says that aliens possibly function out of a secret location. They could be living underground or in multiple regions on Earth that Gen Z would probably call sus, meaning suspicious. Like the Alaskan Triangle, which has been dubbed Alaska's Bermuda Triangle. Some experts claim that it has been ground zero for unexplained events, including more than 20,000 disappearances since the 1970s. Yes, it all sounds like a conspiracy theory at best, so understandably, the study is raising a lot of eyebrows. And the researchers get it. They concede that these theories are hard to sell, especially in the scientific community. And the paper has yet to be peer-reviewed, so take it with a pinch of salt. But the goal here is not to unsettle scientists. It is to ask questions, because aliens are having a moment. Over the past few years, pilots say they have seen extraterrestrial beings. The Pentagon has a new office to look into sightings. Governments have held hearings. NASA has gotten involved, and UFOs have been rebranded. They're no longer called unidentified flying objects or UFOs. They're now unidentified anomalous phenomena. So far, so complicated. But the thing is, despite the shebang, we still don't know enough about aliens. So the study means to take the discussion forward. It wants to ask questions about unidentified observations made around the world every year. After all, just last year, a former Pentagon official went public. He made an explosive allegation in the US Congress. He said that the government had been keeping crashed UFOs and dead aliens. It was a wild accusation. And this year, the Pentagon quashed the claims. No surprise there. Now, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist myself, but doesn't all of this stir doubts? Modern obsession with UFOs goes back to 1947, to the famous alleged UFO crash in the US. The government quickly claimed that it was a weather balloon. But in 1997, they admitted to lying, to conceal that it was actually debris from a top-secret Air Force project. It was called Mughal. And it was designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. And the US is not alone here. Governments across the world have been accused of ridiculing the study of UFOs. And this is strange because these are legitimate questions. So decades later, trust has eroded. There are 10 to 50 billion potentially habitable worlds in our galaxy. The only good news is that people seem to be taking this topic more seriously now. Like on Mars, a rover has collected samples to study existence of life. There are probes on some moons in our solar system, and scientists are actively using artificial intelligence for a little help. NASA recently assembled a team to study UFOs. They say a rigorous, evidence-based, data-driven scientific framework is essential, and they're right. But we say, what is scientific framework without some questions? Across to the West Indies, what can we expect?